Okay, everybody, so now we know the causes of the Renaissance, and we're going to talk about art and architecture in class a little bit more in depth. But let's just get into like who were the people of the Renaissance? What did they change? What got so big? And so we're breaking it up into kind of like a sciencey section and a literature section, and this is where we will start. And so leading into the Renaissance, and it's not quite the Renaissance, but we're starting to come out of the Renaissance, was a man by the name of Dante Alighieri, and he lived from 1265 to 1321. And he was an Italian poet that was most known for his work, The Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy was actually a combination of three separate books: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And they're really, really interesting here because what you've got going on with Dante's Inferno, if you will, is that he takes you through what he has visions of, if you will, of what hell was like. And as you can see on the right are the different types of levels and like what got you into that level. And what was really interesting is Dante was a bit of an angry man, if you will, in that people that he felt had either done him wrong or had wronged society, he put in these different levels of hell and they were getting tortured. It was really, really interesting. I mean, it starts as, if you look in here, the unbaptized, and these are people that are like kind of, sort of in hell, but they're just kind of there, and it's sad because they don't get to hang out with God. And then it gets worse and worse. I mean, he put popes in here, he put politicians in here. It was absolutely crazy. Then he also discussed Purgatorio, which was purgatory, where you go if you're not good enough for heaven or bad enough for hell. And here he was guided by the poet Virgil, which was kind of cool. And he got to hang out. And you basically got like a lot of good guys, but they didn't get Christianity, so no heaven. And then you had Paradiso, which no one really ever reads because it's beautiful and glorious, but it doesn't kind of have the intensity of the Inferno. Now, Dante was really, really huge. And he was huge for a variety of reasons. One, because he's kind of a weird guy. His guide through heaven was this woman, Beatrice, who he had referred to as his love, and she was wonderful, and she died young, yet was kind of weird. He never actually met her and just kind of creepily followed her forever, and she married someone else, and yeah, he had issues. But he did have cool quotes like follow your own and let people speak what they want. I love that idea. But what was the most important thing about him is he actually wrote in Italian, which was mind boggling at this time. It's not what you're really supposed to do. And by doing that, he would start to give his book access to more people. Now, this is going to be a little bit more important later on, but Dante was really kind of the first guy that broke that mold. He also was willing to attack the church. Now, it didn't get him banned because the church guys that he chose were generally bad dudes. But the fact that you had someone here that was actually willing to kind of go out on a limb and challenge the church, that's a big deal. And we're going to talk about that especially even more when we get to the Reformation, but Dante, literal wise, is really important. So he's attacking the church and a little bit of satire, which is kind of very humorous, but speaking in that vernacular language, just common Italian, was huge. However, you don't get bigger, and I would say a guy that you could put in like the top 10 like people ever was Johann Gutenberg, who lived from 1398 to 1468. If you remember the last kind of big guy we talked about technologically wise when it comes to books and stuff, our friend Cy Loon, who had invented paper, crucial. But over time, printing was the thing. But most people tried to either print on things like wood blocks, or they would use silk, or they used movable type, but it was kind of weird. And it was Gutenberg that's going to kind of change everything. One, very stylish, double forked beard, very impressive. What was so different about his printing press and what he did? If you look here, this is actually a scale model of the press that he built. It's huge. On the right, you see the first thing that he made, a Bible. Shocker. But what was absolutely gigantic here was his combination of an effective press that used movable metal type. So they could set a page and then they would set it over here, okay? And that would have this metal writing on it, okay, these little letters like typeset, and that they use in like old school typewriters. Then he would put paper, huge because he chose paper because it was cheap and light, and then they would slide it under here, press it down, and boom, you have a page. What that could do is it made it faster and cheaper. And so now all of a sudden we can make books and regular people can afford them, and it is go time. The spread of knowledge, people getting educated to learn how to read because there were more books. If you lived on a manor for most of the Middle Ages, if someone said to you, "Hey, do you have a book?" you would basically be like, "What? I don't even know what a book is." Although most of you still don't know what a book is, but whatever. Education-wise, again, more people are learning how to read and write, and then what happens is people start again writing in vernacular languages, in German, Italian, and English, and Dutch, and Spanish, and then, it allows for change. And the revolutionaries of the world, Martin Luther, Thomas Paine, Galileo, they will start to publish, they will start to write, and everything just goes through the roof. And we're going to talk about all this massive change, and all of it goes back to Gutenberg. Of course, he was a terrible businessman. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't well off. He was also paranoid, and it took him forever to figure out how to actually finish it, because every day he was convinced someone would steal it, so he disassembled that giant thing down to the screw. So you just can't underestimate, guys, what he did. And then he allowed more people to write. And one such man who was pretty much a contemporary of his was Niccolo Machiavelli, who was famous for writing a book called The Prince. And the whole purpose of The Prince was that it was a book to advise heads of state. And the ideas in it really was very focused on what you needed to do to be a successful leader. And it was all about leading your nation. It's not about you as a good guy, it's about what needs to be done. And the most famous topic that comes up on this is the idea of is it more important for a ruler to be loved or feared? And he's very kind of straightforward here. The reply is that one ought to be both feared and loved, but it is much safer to be feared than loved, if one of the two has to be wanting. For love is held by a chain of obligations, which, men being selfish, is broken whenever it serves their purposes. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment for which never fails. It sounds kind of dark, but if you think about the time period in which he's living in, he's kind of right. He threw out the ideas that you should have a standing army, that whereas yes, it's nice to actually care for your people, the state must come first. On the topic of honesty and morality, he basically says that you must look moral and honest, but in truth, you don't need to be honest. You need to get done what needs to be done. And you need to do it for your country, because it's all about being patriotic. Now, some people often argue, did Machiavelli actually think this? And we get the term of Machiavellian, which is sneaky and underhanded and just brutal in what needs to get done. But I don't really know either way. But what his book was, which was tremendously influential and short if you ever want to read it, it really paved the way for an age of absolute monarchs that is going to follow, of these rulers who would do anything and everything to hold power and dominate their nations for the good, in a certain kind of way. Of course, good, loaded word. But nonetheless, This book was tremendously influential, and guess what? It gets published, and when it gets published, it gets out there. And then, of course, we have the Titan, and that is William Shakespeare, living from 1564 to 1616. You know, we're going to keep it short here, but he was tremendous. And of course, the basic controversy really goes to who actually wrote those plays. We have some evidence that it was Shakespeare, then you have other people that are coming out, and it gets all sorts of crazy, and it's like, hey, it was Christopher Marlowe. No, it was Edward de Vere. Hey, maybe it was J.K. Rowling. I don't know, maybe it was Gollum, and in the end, of course, maybe it was just aliens too. I don't know. You know, there's different ways that you can look at it, but as far as it's fun to look at the controversy of it, the fact of the matter is those plays got written, and those plays are huge. We have 36 plays, we have 154 sonnets, and the guy is incredible. First and foremost, we learned so much about the human condition from his plays on how people tick and what is good and what is evil, and in many cases how it's not so pretty. And he really showed the power of the word, if you will. And if you think about it, I mean, my goodness, you all still read them in school today. So whether you like him or not, you got to think he's important. He also is, you know, really important in the English language, the amount of words that he uses. It gives us a deeper understanding, and many of them actually are used in the future. And his overall importance, you know, you can't really understate it. He's the greatest literary figure that's actually ever lived. I mean, the idea of the appreciation of plays and poetry, and the idea of we can learn so much about culture through reading what the plays were at the time, all of that came back to Shakespeare. So in the end, whether it was him or Gollum or an alien, it doesn't really matter. Those plays transformed what literature could be and took it to a whole new level. And the final guy that we talk about is Miguel Cervantes, who was another contemporary, 1546 to 1616. He actually died 2 weeks after Billy because, you know, they were tight. He was a soldier for much of his career, and actually, after he was a soldier, he visited Rome and went to some libraries and got really inspired to become a writer. Also, you know, great quotes here. He who loses wealth loses much. He who loses a friend loses more. But he that loses courage loses all. His most famous book is Don Quixote. And Don Quixote is really seen as the world's actual first modern novel. Um, it was actually put in 2 different volumes, and it was a satire on knights and chivalry and the ideas, kind of the foolishness of feudalism. But it had this beginning, middle, and end, and it's just an incredibly well written book. You should definitely read it if you have the opportunity, because if you look at most novels, they really do follow the structure that Don Quixote had. And this is a little picture here of Don Quixote, this satirical knight, and his buddy Pancho, and there's all sorts of windmills involved. Read it. Just read it. Trust me, it's okay. It's worth it. He was also tremendously influential on Spanish, just like that Shakespeare was on English and that the Grimm brothers were on German. And it, boom, this guy sold, or to give you an idea, this is the best-selling novel of all time. If you think Harry Potter was huge, this guy sold 500 million copies. I repeat, there have been 500 million copies of this book. It is number 4 all time. Again, these are estimates, and the only thing it's behind are, 1, quotes from Chairman Mao that Mao Zedong made everybody in China buy, so it really doesn't count. The Quran and the Bible. So when the only things that really beat you are the Quran and the Bible, you're pretty awesome. But what we see at this time is a flowering of literature and writing, and we're going to get pamphlets and science coming soon. It's a dynamic time, and it's really going to change things. Okay, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you get your comments and your questions.